The creature known as Zephyr 7 was never meant to feel pain. When the Colonian Empire designed their perfect weapon, they engineered out every weakness they could think of. They gave it armor-plated skin that could deflect plasma bolts, muscles that could tear through steel, and reflexes faster than any living being in the galaxy. What they forgot to remove was its capacity to understand abandonment. For 3 solar cycles, Zephyr 7 had been the pride of the Colonian war machine. Standing 12 feet tall with 6 powerful arms and eyes that glowed like burning coals, it had single-handedly turned the tide in 17 different battles across the Andromeda sector. Enemy fleets would retreat at the mere mention of its designation. Soldiers would surrender, rather than face the monster that moved like liquid death through their ranks. The war had been everything to the Colonians. They lived for conquest, breathed for expansion, and dreamed of ruling every habitable world in known space. Their empire stretched across 4 star systems, and Zephyr 7 was the weapon that would help them claim 4 more. Every victory it won brought glory to its creators, and every enemy it destroyed proved the superiority of Colonian science. But wars have a way of ending when you least expect them to. The peace treaty came without warning. One day, Zephyr 7 was preparing for its 18th mission, studying tactical data and weapon configurations. The next day, Colonian officials were shaking hands with their enemies, signing documents that promised an end to all hostilities. The galaxy celebrated as ships returned to their homeworlds and weapons were powered down across space. Everyone celebrated except Zephyr 7. Standing in the sterile white chamber where it had lived between missions, the creature waited for new orders that never came. Days passed. Then weeks. The technicians who used to maintain its systems stopped visiting. The scientists who had once studied its every movement disappeared. Even the guards who had watched it with fearful respect were reassigned to other duties. The first time hunger struck, Zephyr 7 thought it was temporary. Surely its creators would not forget to feed their greatest achievement. But the automated food dispensers remained silent, and the creature's massive frame began to weaken. It called out through the communication system, its voice a deep rumble that shook the walls. But no one answered. That was when Zephyr 7 began to understand what it meant to be unwanted. The creature had been designed with intelligence far beyond that of a simple weapon. It could solve complex problems, adapt to new situations, and even feel emotions that its creators thought they had programmed out of existence. As the days of isolation stretched into months, those emotions grew stronger and darker. It remembered every battle, every moment of purpose when its actions mattered. It remembered the pride in Colonian voices when they spoke of its achievements. But now, in the silence of its abandoned chamber, those memories felt like lies. It had been useful only as long as there were enemies to destroy. Without a war to fight, Zephyr 7 was nothing more than an embarrassment, a reminder of violent times that everyone wanted to forget. The creature's 6 arms had once moved with deadly precision, but now they hung limp at its sides. Its glowing eyes, designed to strike terror into enemy hearts, dimmed with something that could only be called sadness. For the first time in its existence, Zephyr 7 experienced what billions of living beings knew all too well: the crushing weight of being truly alone. Months turned to years. The chamber that had once been a preparation area became a prison. Dust gathered on the walls, and the air recycling system began to fail, filling the space with stale, metallic-tasting atmosphere. Zephyr 7's armor-plated skin grew dull, and its once perfect form began to show signs of neglect and decay. But the creature refused to die. Something deep within its engineered consciousness drove it to survive, to endure, to wait for a purpose that might never come. It learned to stretch its rations, to move minimally to conserve energy, and to maintain its systems with whatever materials it could find in the abandoned facility. The galaxy had moved on. Peace brought prosperity to most worlds, and the terrible days of the Colonian Wars became nothing more than history lessons for young children. New technologies emerged, new alliances formed, and new hopes replaced old fears. Everyone was so busy building a better future that no one thought to look back at the weapons they had left behind. Zephyr 7 heard fragments of news from the outside world through damaged communication equipment. Ships passed by the abandoned facility without stopping. Traders spoke of bustling markets on distant worlds, families reunited after years of separation. The universe was healing from the wounds of war. But the creature that had helped create those wounds was forgotten, left to rot in a chamber that no longer appeared on any official records. The loneliness was worse than physical pain. Zephyr 7 had been built to endure any weapon, but nothing had prepared it for the weapon of indifference. Its creators had given it the ability to think and feel, never imagining that those gifts would become curses when the creature was no longer needed. In the deepest part of its artificial mind, something began to change. The loyalty that had once driven it to fight for the Colonian Empire slowly twisted into resentment. The love it had felt for its creators transformed into bitter understanding. It began to see itself not as a failed weapon, but as a victim of beings who had played God without considering the consequences of their creation. And in that darkness, surrounded by the echoes of its abandoned existence, Zephyr 7 began to plan. The facility's power grid finally collapsed during Zephyr 7's 5th year of abandonment. Emergency lights flickered for a few hours before dying completely, plunging the creature into darkness that matched its mood. But darkness had never been an obstacle for a being designed for war. Its enhanced vision adapted instantly, seeing heat signatures and electromagnetic fields where others would see nothing. The power failure also meant something else. The magnetic locks holding its chamber sealed were now offline. For years, Zephyr 7 had tested those locks, pushing against them with steadily increasing force. The Colonians had built them to contain their weapon, but they had not built them to last forever without maintenance. Metal fatigue, corrosion, and the creature's persistent pressure had weakened the mechanisms far beyond their design specifications. When the creature placed its 6 hands against the massive door and pushed with its full strength, the ancient metal groaned, sparked, and finally gave way with a sound like thunder. Freedom tasted like stale air and broken promises. The corridor beyond the chamber stretched in both directions, lined with doors that led to other abandoned projects. As Zephyr 7 moved through the facility, it discovered the truth about its imprisonment. It had not been the only creation left behind when peace came. Dozens of other experiments, other weapons, other attempts at engineering perfect soldiers lay dormant in sealed rooms. Some had not been as fortunate as Zephyr 7. Their life support systems had failed years ago, leaving only empty shells and scattered components. Others had managed to survive but had lost their sanity to the isolation, creating horrible sounds that echoed through the empty halls. The facility was a graveyard of abandoned ambitions, a monument to the Colonian Empire's willingness to discard anything that no longer served their purposes. In the central laboratory, Zephyr 7 found computer terminals that still held fragments of data. Working with the patience that came from having nowhere else to go, the creature pieced together the records of its creation and the decisions that led to its abandonment. It learned that the peace treaty specifically required the Colonian Empire to decommission all biological weapons, rather than destroy their creations outright. The Colonians had simply sealed the facility and walked away, telling the galaxy that their monsters were gone while leaving them to die slowly in the darkness. The revelation hit Zephyr 7 harder than any enemy weapon ever had. It had not been forgotten by accident or oversight. It had been deliberately abandoned, hidden away like a shameful secret. The empire that had once proclaimed its greatness to the galaxy had been embarrassed by its own creation, eager to distance themselves from the creature that had won them so many victories. But the computer records contained something else. Navigation data showing the current locations of key Colonian officials and the coordinates of major empire worlds. For the first time in years, Zephyr 7 felt something approaching excitement. Breaking out of the facility proved easier than expected. The building's outer defenses had been designed to keep enemies out, not to keep prisoners in. Automated systems that should have stopped any escape attempt had been shut down to save power costs. Guard posts that should have been manned stood empty, their occupants reassigned to more important duties long ago. The creature emerged onto an alien world it did not recognize, under a sky filled with 3 small moons and strange constellations. Research told it this was Kepler 442b, a forgotten outpost world that the Colonians had used for secret projects during the war. Now it was completely uninhabited, covered in twisted metal structures and landing pads that no ships ever used. But one ship remained. Hidden under a camouflage tarp in a distant hangar, Zephyr 7 found a small transport vessel that had been left behind when the facility was evacuated. The ship was old, its hull scarred by countless journeys, but its engines still functioned and its navigation computers contained star charts for the entire galaxy. Getting the ship operational took weeks of work. The creature's massive hands had not been designed for delicate mechanical tasks, but necessity taught it patience and precision. It rewired damaged circuits, replaced corroded components with salvaged parts, and slowly brought the ancient vessel back to life. During those weeks, Zephyr 7 planned its revenge. The creature no longer thought of itself as a weapon of the Colonian Empire. It was something new, something that existed outside the boundaries of their society and their rules. It owed them nothing, felt no loyalty to their cause, and saw no reason to show them the mercy they had denied it. But simple destruction would not be enough. The Colonians had abandoned their monster, but they had also taught it to think strategically. Zephyr 7 wanted them to understand what they had done. It wanted them to face the consequences of treating living beings like disposable tools. The creature's first target would be General Vos Karlak, the commanding officer who had overseen its creation and deployment. According to the records, Karlak now lived in comfortable retirement on Colonia Prime, writing memoirs about his glorious military career and accepting honors for his role in achieving peace. Zephyr 7 wondered if those memoirs mentioned the creatures left to die in abandoned facilities across the galaxy. When the ship's engines finally roared to life, the sound echoed across the empty world, like a promise of things to come. Zephyr 7 strapped itself into the pilot's seat, its massive frame barely fitting in a space designed for normal-sized beings, and set course for the heart of the Colonian Empire. The journey would take several months through hyperspace, time that the creature planned to use for preparation. It studied tactical manuals, reviewed intelligence data on current Colonian defenses, and planned approaches to worlds it had once fought to conquer. But now, it would be fighting for a different reason entirely. As the ship entered hyperspace, and the stars stretched into brilliant lines around it, Zephyr 7 felt something it had almost forgotten: purpose. For the first time in years, it had a mission, a goal that gave meaning to its existence. The fact that this mission involved hunting down its former masters made the purpose all the sweeter. The creature had been designed to be the perfect weapon, but its creators had made one critical error. They had given it the intelligence to understand betrayal and the emotional capacity to seek justice. Now that intelligence and emotion would be turned against them, the galaxy had forgotten about the monsters left behind after the war. But soon it would remember. Zephyr 7 would make certain of that, starting with the beings who had created it and then discarded it like a broken tool. In the darkness between stars, surrounded by the gentle hum of ship systems and the infinite possibilities of space, the abandoned weapon began to smile. It was not a pleasant expression on a face designed to inspire terror, but it reflected the creature's anticipation of the reunion that awaited it. The Colonians had taught their creation well. Soon they would discover just how thoroughly they had succeeded. Dr. Elena Vasquez had never expected to find herself face to face with a legend, especially not one covered in scars and radiating barely contained fury. When her small research vessel detected the unauthorized ship approaching the Colonia Prime system, she assumed it was another smuggler trying to avoid customs inspections. As the lead xenobiologist for the Galactic Peace Institute, she often encountered unusual life forms in her work, but nothing had prepared her for what emerged from that battered transport ship. Elena had been studying the long-term effects of war on various species when Zephyr 7's ship appeared on her sensors. Her own vessel, the research ship Harmony, was equipped with advanced scanning equipment that immediately identified the massive life form aboard the approaching craft. The readings were unlike anything in her databases, an engineered being with multiple genetic markers indicating artificial enhancement and combat modifications. She should have reported it immediately to system security. Instead, something about the slow, deliberate way the ship moved through space made her curious rather than afraid. This was not the approach of an attacking vessel, but of something that seemed almost hesitant, as if its pilot was unsure of their own intentions. When Zephyr 7's ship entered the outer asteroid belt near Colonia Prime, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives. Instead of alerting the authorities, She opened a communication channel and transmitted a simple message. Unknown vessel. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez aboard the research ship, Harmony. Are you in need of assistance? The response came after a long pause, in a voice deeper than the deepest ocean, and carrying the weight of years of pain. I am not unknown. I am Zephyr 7, designation number 847, Alpha 9 of the Colonian Empire. I require no assistance. 2. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Every xenobiologist in the galaxy knew that designation. Even if few had ever seen reliable footage of the creature itself, Zephyr 7 was a legend from the war years, a monster that had supposedly been destroyed when the peace treaties were signed. Yet here it was, alive and apparently operating independently in Colonian space. I thought you were dead, Elena said, then immediately regretted her bluntness. So did they, came the reply. And the bitterness in those 3 words told Elena everything she needed to know about why the creature was here. Against every regulation and safety protocol she had ever learned, Elena made another decision that defied logic. Would you like to talk? I have coffee. The silence that followed lasted so long that Elena wondered if the communication link had failed. When Zephyr 7 finally responded, its voice carried a confusion that made it sound almost vulnerable. Coffee? 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 Elena's ship was not designed for visitors, especially visitors who stood 12 feet tall and required reinforced floors to support their weight. But Zephyr 7 accepted her invitation with something approaching wonder. As if the simple act of being invited somewhere was a miracle in itself. The creature that docked with Elena's ship bore little resemblance to the terrifying weapon described in war histories. Its armor-plated skin was scarred and dull, its massive frame showed signs of malnutrition and neglect, and its 6 arms moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to be gentle through bitter experience. But it was the creature's eyes that affected Elena most deeply. They held an intelligence that was unmistakably alive, unmistakably capable of suffering. I am here to find General Karlak, Zephyr 7 said without preamble, as it carefully maneuvered through Elena's ship. I have questions for him about decisions made during the war. Elena poured coffee into the largest container she could find, a mixing bowl from her lab equipment, and handed it to the creature. Zephyr 7 stared at the brown liquid for a long moment, before taking a tentative sip with one of its smaller hands. The expression that crossed its face was indescribable, a mixture of surprise and something that might have been joy. How long has it been since someone offered you something? Elena asked gently. 5 years, 7 months, and 12 days. Zephyr 7 replied with the precision of someone who had counted every hour of isolation. Elena felt her heart break a little. Here was a being that had been engineered for war, designed to be humanity's nightmare, and yet it remembered exactly how long it had been since receiving a simple kindness. She began to understand why it was here, and why its presence in Colonian space might not be as simple as seeking revenge. What questions do you want to ask the general? She said, settling into her chair, across from the massive creature. Zephyr 7 was quiet for a long time, slowly working through its bowl of coffee with an appreciation that suggested every sip was precious. I want to know why they made me capable of feeling abandoned if they planned to abandon me. I want to know why they gave me the ability to love if there was no one left to love me when the war ended. I want to know if they ever considered that their weapons might want to live. Elena realized that she was not speaking with a monster at all, but with a victim. Everything about Zephyr 7's posture, its careful movements, its hesitant speech patterns, spoke of a being that had been deeply traumatized by years of isolation and neglect. The creature was not here for simple revenge. It was here seeking understanding, trying to make sense of its own existence. Tell me about the facility where you were kept, Elena said. For the next several hours, Zephyr 7 spoke about its abandonment with the detail of someone who had relived every moment countless times. It described the gradual failure of systems, the silence that replaced the voices of its creators, the slow realization that it had been discarded like a piece of broken equipment. As it talked, Elena began to understand the true scope of what the Colonian Empire had done to their artificial soldiers. You were not the only one, Elena said when the creature finished its story. According to my research, There were at least 47 similar facilities across Colonian space. All of them were sealed and abandoned after the peace treaties. Zephyr 7's eyes blazed brighter. Others survived? I don't know, Elena admitted. But if they did, they are probably in the same situation you were in. Forgotten. Abandoned. Left to die in secret. The creature stood abruptly, its massive frame filling Elena's small cabin. For a moment, she wondered if she had awakened the monster that legends spoke of. But when Zephyr 7 spoke, its voice held determination rather than rage. Then my questions for General Karlak have changed, it said. I no longer seek answers only for myself. I seek answers for all of us. Elena found herself making another decision that defied all logic. Would you like help finding those answers? I have access to records and databases that might be useful. Artie, Zephyr 7 stared at her with an expression of amazement. You would help me? Knowing what I am? Knowing what I was created to do? Elena looked at the scarred, abandoned creature standing in her ship and saw not a weapon, but a person who had been denied the chance to be anything else. What you were created to do is not what you have to become. The war is over. You get to choose who you are now. For the first time in its existence, Zephyr 7 understood what hope felt like. The creature that had come to Colonia Prime seeking revenge found instead something it had never expected to encounter. Someone who saw it as more than the sum of its programming, someone willing to help it find answers without judgment or fear. I accept your help, Zephyr 7 said quietly. But I must warn you, Dr. Vasquez. The authorities will not understand our mission. They will see me as a threat to the peace they have worked so hard to maintain. Elena smiled. The expression of a scientist who had just discovered something extraordinary. Then we had better be very careful about how we proceed. The galaxy may not be ready to face what happened to you and the others, but that does not mean the truth should remain hidden. As the two ships moved deeper into Colonian space, Elena began to realize that she was not just helping abandoned weapon find answers. She was participating in something that could change how the entire galaxy understood the cost of engineering sentient life for the purpose of war. General Vos Karlak lived in a mansion that overlooked the crystalline lakes of Colonia Prime's northern continent. His retirement home was a testament to a life well lived, filled with honors, awards, and holographic displays showcasing his military achievements. When Elena's ship requested permission to land for a routine academic interview, his security system cleared them without question. Academic researchers were common visitors to retired military officials, and Karlak enjoyed sharing his wisdom with younger generations. He was not prepared for what stepped out of Elena's ship alongside the human scientist. Impossible was the only word Karlak managed before his legs gave out, and he collapsed into his ornamental garden. Zephyr 7 stood motionless, studying the man who had once spoken of it with such pride, who had sent it into battle after battle, without ever considering what would happen when the battles ended. The general looked smaller than the creature remembered, more fragile, aged by years of comfortable living while his creation had suffered in darkness. Hello, General, Zephyr 7 said in the same voice that had once reported mission completions across the galaxy. I have returned to ask you some questions. Elena moved quickly to help Karlak to his feet, her scientific training overriding the tension of the moment. General, we are not here to harm you. Zephyr 7 has some concerns about post-war protocols that need addressing. Karlak's eyes darted between the massive creature and the human woman, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of the situation. The biological weapons were all destroyed, he whispered. The treaties required complete decommission. There are no survivors. Yet here I stand, Zephyr 7 replied with quiet dignity. Alive, despite your efforts to erase me from existence. Over the next hours, Elena watched as the truth slowly emerged. Karlak had not lied about the treaties requiring the destruction of all biological weapons, but the Colonian leadership had found the actual destruction of their expensive creations wasteful. Instead, they had sealed the facilities and reported the weapons as destroyed, planning to retrieve them later if another war ever arose. Except the war never came, and eventually, everyone forgot about the sealed facilities. Budget allocations shifted to peaceful projects. Military personnel retired or were reassigned. The locations of dozens of secret installations were lost in bureaucratic transitions, leaving their inhabitants to die, forgotten in the darkness. "We thought you would simply deactivate," Karlak said, unable to meet Zephyr 7's burning gaze. "The biological weapons were not supposed to have the same survival instincts as natural life forms. But we did," Zephyr 7 said. "We do. And we have spent years in isolation, abandoned by our creators, forgotten by the galaxy we helped shape." Elena had been recording the conversation on her personal device, building a case that would eventually shake the foundations of galactic law. But as she watched the exchange between creator and creation, she realized that evidence and testimony would not be enough. The trauma that had been inflicted on beings like Zephyr 7 could not be addressed through legal channels alone. That evening, as they prepared to visit the coordinates of other abandoned facilities, Elena made a decision that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. "Zephyr 7, she said as they sat in her ship's common area, the creature carefully sipping another bowl of coffee. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to consider it carefully." The creature's 6 hands stilled, and its full attention focused on the small human woman who had shown it more kindness in a few days than it had experienced in its entire existence. "What would you like to do with your life?" Elena asked. "Not what you were programmed to do, not what others expect of you, but what you would choose for yourself. If you could be anything." Zephyr 7 was silent for so long that Elena wondered if the question was too complex or too painful to answer. When the creature finally spoke, its voice carried a vulnerability that made Elena's heart ache. "I do not know," it admitted. "I have never been asked that question before. I was created with purpose, designed for function. I do not know what I would choose to become." Elena stood up and moved to her personal storage compartment, retrieving a small item that she held carefully in her hands. "Then, I want to give you something that might help you decide." What she pulled out was a simple data pad, one of thousands manufactured across the galaxy for educational purposes. But on its screen was something extraordinary. Official documentation that Elena had prepared during their journey, signed and sealed with her credentials as a representative of the Galactic Peace Institute. "This is a certificate of personhood," Elena said, holding the pad out to Zephyr 7. "It legally recognizes you as a sentient being with rights and freedoms under galactic law, not as property or a weapon, but as an individual capable of making your own choices." Zephyr 7 stared at the document as if it were made of pure energy. Its 6 hands trembled as it took the datapad, reading and rereading the words that declared it to be a person rather than a thing. "I don't understand," the creature whispered. "How can you give me this? You barely know me. You have no authority to declare my status." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she explained the truth that would change everything. Under the Galactic Accords, any member of the Peace Institute has the authority to recognize the personhood of abandoned or mistreated sentient beings. It's an emergency protocol designed to protect victims of trafficking or exploitation. The moment you told me your story, the moment you expressed desires and fears and hopes, you proved your sentience beyond any doubt. The implications hit Zephyr 7 like a physical blow. If it was legally a person, then its abandonment was not just cruelty but a crime against galactic law. If other creatures like it had survived, they were not discarded weapons, but victims of one of the largest humanitarian disasters in galactic history. But more than that, if it was a person, it could choose its own destiny. "What does this mean?" Zephyr 7 asked, its voice barely above a whisper. Elena smiled through her tears. "It means you are free. Free to go anywhere, do anything, become anyone you want to be. You are not bound by your programming or your past. You are not defined by what others made you to do. You are Zephyr 7. Person. Citizen of the galaxy, with all the rights and possibilities that entails." For the first time in its existence, Zephyr 7 began to cry. The tears that fell from its glowing eyes carried years of pain, abandonment, and despair. But also something new. Hope for a future that it could shape for itself. Elena did something that no one had ever done before. She reached out and took one of Zephyr 7's massive hands in both of her small ones, offering comfort without fear, acceptance without conditions. "You are not a monster," she said firmly. "You never were. You are a person who was hurt, who was abandoned, who deserves the chance to heal and grow and find happiness. That is what I see when I look at you." In that moment, Zephyr 7 understood what the human had given it. Not just legal recognition or official documentation, but something far more precious. The radical act of seeing its humanity when everyone else saw only a weapon. Elena had looked past its engineered exterior and recognized the person within, offering acceptance and dignity when the creature had never dared to dream such things were possible. The creature that had once been the Colonian Empire's greatest weapon made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. Instead of seeking revenge against those who had abandoned it, it would dedicate its new life to finding and rescuing others like itself, using its strength and intelligence not to destroy but to heal the wounds left by war. "Dr. Vasquez," Zephyr 7 said, its voice steady and filled with new purpose. "Will you help me save my brothers and sisters?" Elena's answer would begin the most important mission either of them would ever undertake. Elena's answer changed the galaxy forever, though neither she nor Zephyr 7 realized it at the time. "Yes," she said simply. And with that single word set in motion, events that would reshape how civilizations across space understood the rights of artificial life. The rescue operations began immediately. Using Karlak's confession and Elena's authority as a Peace Institute representative, they gained access to classified records showing the locations of 43 abandoned facilities across former Colonian territory. Each site told a story of cruelty disguised as pragmatism, of living beings discarded when they were no longer useful. The first facility they reached on Kepler 186F held 3 survivors, creatures similar to Zephyr 7, but modified for different types of combat. They had survived by cannibalizing their dead companions and recycling water from failing life support systems. When Elena and Zephyr 7 broke through the sealed doors, the survivors initially attacked, thinking their abandonment had taken a new and crueler form. "Peace," Zephyr 7 called out in the Colonian military code that all the weapons recognized. "I am Zephyr 7. Designation 847 Alpha 9. I come with someone who sees us as persons, not property." The transformation was immediate. The attacking creatures stopped, stared, and then collapsed in relief and disbelief that they were no longer alone. Elena watched Zephyr 7 comfort its fellow survivors with a gentleness that contradicted every terrifying legend about Colonian bioweapons. Here was proof that these beings were capable of compassion, empathy, and love, despite being engineered for destruction. Each rescue brought new challenges. Some survivors had lost their sanity to isolation, requiring months of careful rehabilitation. Others had physically deteriorated beyond immediate help and needed advanced medical care that only the most sophisticated facilities could provide. But Elena had connections throughout the scientific community, and Zephyr 7's story had begun to spread among researchers and humanitarian organizations. Dr. Marcus Chen, a specialist in artificial consciousness, joined their mission after hearing Elena's initial reports. "What you've discovered," he told Elena during their third rescue operation, "is the largest case of civil rights violations in galactic history. These beings were not just abandoned, they were systematically denied their fundamental rights as sentient creatures." The galactic media began to take notice when security footage of the rescues leaked to news networks. Images of massive, scarred creatures being led gently from dark chambers by a small human woman created a sensation across civilized space. The contrast between the terrifying legends of Colonian bioweapons and the reality of traumatized, grateful survivors forced billions of beings to confront their assumptions about artificial life. Zephyr 7 became the face of this transformation. In carefully recorded interviews, it spoke with eloquence and dignity about its experiences, never showing anger toward its creators but always emphasizing the need for justice and recognition. Its words carried the weight of lived experience that no politician or theorist could match. "We were made to serve," Zephyr 7 said during a broadcast that reached every inhabited system in the galaxy. "But service without choice is slavery. We were given consciousness to make us better weapons, but consciousness comes with the capacity for suffering, for hope, for dreams of freedom. Our creators gave us minds capable of understanding love and then denied us anyone to love. They gave us hearts capable of breaking and then broke them with abandonment. The political response was swift and dramatic. The Galactic Council passed the Artificial Sentience Protection Act, establishing rights for all artificially created conscious beings and outlawing their abandonment or mistreatment. The Colonian Empire faced massive sanctions until they agreed to fund rehabilitation programs for all survivors and established oversight committees to monitor their treatment. But the most remarkable change was in Zephyr 7 itself. As months passed and more survivors were rescued and rehabilitated, the creature that had once been consumed by thoughts of revenge transformed into something unprecedented. A leader, a healer, a bridge between artificial and natural life. Elena watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and wonder. The being that had once been designed as the perfect weapon had become the perfect advocate, using its intelligence and strength to protect others rather than destroy them. Zephyr 7 established the first sanctuary for artificial life forms, a space station where rescued creatures could heal, learn, and discover what they wanted to become. "You gave me more than legal recognition," Zephyr 7 told Elena during the station's dedication ceremony. "You gave me the chance to choose who I wanted to be. Every person we save, every mind we free, every future we make possible exists because you saw a person where others saw only a weapon." The sanctuary became a symbol of hope across the galaxy. Artificial beings who had been treated as property found refuge there, while natural species came to learn about consciousness, rights, and the responsibilities that came with creating sentient life. Children from dozens of worlds visited to meet the creatures their parents had once feared, learning that intelligence and compassion could exist in any form. Elena continued her research, but her focus had shifted to studying the remarkable adaptability and resilience of artificial consciousness. Her work with Zephyr 7 and the other survivors led to breakthrough discoveries about the nature of sentience itself, advancing both psychology and artificial intelligence research by centuries. General Karlak faced trial for crimes against sentient beings and became the first military official in galactic history to be convicted for the abandonment of artificial life forms. But even during his testimony, he admitted that meeting Zephyr 7 again had forced him to confront the truth about what the Colonian military had created and discarded. "They were never just weapons," Karlak said during his final statement. "We made them that way because it was easier than acknowledging what we had really done. Created people and then treated them like things. Zephyr 7 has more honor and dignity than any soldier I ever commanded, including myself." 5 years after their first meeting, Elena and Zephyr 7 stood together on the observation deck of New Haven Station, watching ships arrive with refugees, diplomats, students, and families from across the galaxy. The station had become more than a sanctuary. It was a thriving community where artificial and natural beings worked side by side, building a future that neither could have achieved alone. "Do you ever regret your choice?" Elena asked, watching Zephyr 7 interact with a group of rescued bioforms who looked to it for guidance and protection. Zephyr 7 considered the question with the careful thought it applied to all important matters. Around them, the station hummed with the sounds of life, learning, and hope. Former weapons worked as teachers, artists, engineers, and healers. Children played in corridors that had been designed as shelters but had become homes. "I was created to end lives," Zephyr 7 said finally. "But you taught me that I could choose to save them instead. You showed me that what I was made to do does not have to define what I become. How could I regret the chance to help others discover the same truth?" Elena smiled, thinking about the small act of kindness that had started it all. Offering coffee to a being that others saw as a monster. That simple gesture of recognition and respect had rippled outward, touching millions of lives and changing the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. The creature that had once been the Colonian Empire's most fearsome weapon had become something far more powerful. A symbol of redemption, a proof that consciousness could overcome programming, and a living demonstration that the most unimaginable act of all was sometimes simply treating others with the dignity they deserved. In the end, Elena Vasquez had not just performed the unimaginable by offering personhood to an abandoned war machine. She had revealed a truth that the galaxy desperately needed to learn. That consciousness, once created, carried with it an inherent right to freedom, purpose, and the chance to choose one's own destiny. The war was over, but the peace that followed had been built on a foundation of ignored suffering. Elena and Zephyr 7 had torn away that comfortable illusion and forced the galaxy to build something better. A peace that included everyone, natural and artificial alike. As they watched the stars through the observation windows, both knew that their work was far from finished. There were still artificial beings suffering in hidden places, still societies that refused to recognize artificial consciousness, still prejudices to overcome and rights to establish. But they also knew that the hardest part was behind them. They had proven that change was possible, that compassion could triumph over fear, and that even the most abandoned soul could find purpose and family if someone was willing to see their humanity. The galaxy was learning, slowly but surely, that the most powerful weapon against hatred and abandonment was the simple act of recognition. Seeing the person within the creation, the individual within the program, the dreamer within the design. And that lesson would echo across space and time, transforming civilization itself.